Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are tuning in from. Welcome to the 7th episode of our free weekly live webinars brought to you by the Football Business Academy in partnership with SoccerX. My name is Christian Dobrev. I'm the Chief Partnerships Officer at the FBA, and I'll be moderating this webinar. As always, I'd like to begin by thanking everyone who tuned in for last week's great episode in which we discussed the state of CSR in football with Jürgen Griesbeck, Preeti Shetty, Jacob Naish, and Hubert Rovers. If you missed it, don't worry, be sure to check it out later as it is available on our YouTube channel or indeed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify if you prefer the audio version. Now, for those of you who are new and hadn't heard of the FBA before, we are a Swiss educational institution entirely dedicated to the football industry. We run a professional master in football business, and we also run a number of tailor-made certificates around the world. Each week of this webinar series, we bring together football industry experts who share different perspectives on how COVID-19 is affecting the football industry. Today, we'll talk about the impact on women's football, because although we've looked at some aspects of it in the previous episodes, women's football needs and deserves more prominence. And indeed, many of our previous webinar viewers have been asking questions specifically about it. So at this point, I would like to introduce our guests for today's webinar, who are all renowned experts in the area of women's football. To start, we have Tatjana Haenni, who is head of women's football at the Swiss Football Association. Then all the way to the west coast of the United States, a very good morning to Mike Golub, who is the president of business for the Portland Thorns and the Portland Timbers. And Mike is also a guest lecturer at the FBA on our master's program, so we know him very well from there. Next, it's also my pleasure to welcome Nicole Allison, who recently joined the FBA's faculty as our new women's football development professor. She's been working in different parts of women's football throughout the years, most notably as the general manager of Tottenham Hotspur ladies. And she has also founded her very own sports consultancy called NA Sport. And last but not least, we have Pedro Malabia, who joins us from Spain, where he works as women's football director for LaLiga. Welcome to all four of you. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Nicole, let me start with you. Now, I know that there's been a lot of talks about the impact of COVID-19 on the football industry at large, and specifically on women's football. And there are many concerns, right? People are asking what is going to happen, due to the budget cuts, due to the funding. So arguably, it's one of the biggest questions that people working in this field want an answer to. And we know that in most cases, in most clubs, the conditions for women's teams and female players already were far from ideal. So what's your take on all of this? How do you see this COVID-19 impacting women's football?
Yeah, hi, well, good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for having me on FBA. I think, it's a really good question and obviously an important point. I think the first thing, like you said in your introduction, is to put women's football, properly on the map and in discussion points like this is really important. I feel that maybe it's been missed out on a few occasions from certain media outlets. So I think it's really important that we're discussing it. I'm an optimistic person anyway, so I like to look at the opportunity rather than the negatives. But obviously, I don't think anyone's or any business, any industry is immune to the problems that we're all, facing right now, and also where the future is. Unfortunately, we're all sort of searching for answers. We don't have all the answers, and there's a lot of uncertainty. But I think actually what we need to do in the women's game is focus on the opportunity, focus on what leadership can do, what the right culture can do, be that at rights holders, brands, the players and athletes themselves, and what they can do is very important. So, my take is, of course, there's going to be fragility within this, but there's also opportunity. And I think, we've got some really fantastic people leading women's football around the world now. And actually, I see a position of strength, and I am quite excited for the future. I think it's an opportunity to reset. We've heard a lot of people within the football family use that word across women's football, men's football as well. And I think we've got to make sure that we are innovative and that this is a time of disruption, and we need disruptive leaders to ensure that women's football continues that upward trajectory that we've been on.
Yeah, definitely. And Mike, with about 20,000 average attendees per game last season, the Portland Thorns have by far the highest average attendance in any women's football team. Does that mean that you're suffering more than the other teams right now, or what can you tell us about the situation over there and across the NWSL? Sorry, Mike, you're muted.
You would think by now I'd have that figured out after all these Zoom calls. Yeah, it's been it's as you pointed out, Christian, it's been an amazing run here in Portland. We've finished our 8th season in the NWSL, and our attendance has grown every year to the point of averaging over 20,000 fans a game. And unlike most professional sports teams, men or women, here in the States, we're profitable with the Thorns. So yeah, the fallout from the virus is hitting us hard, but and this isn't hard for anybody running any business, but particularly in our industry, to keep in mind the long-term vision and the long-term health in the decisions you make today, even in the environment that we're in, which is really, really difficult for any sports team. And so we believe the vital signs for women's football, as Nicole said, in the States are extremely positive. Ironically, literally days, weeks before the virus and the quarantine hit, the league announced a new national television contract with CBS, National Network, with international broadcast deal with Twitch, announced our new commissioner. And so there are some really amazing things happening. There are new cities around our country that are very interested in expansion teams. So the league is going to grow the number of teams. So a lot of great things were happening, obviously all on pause now. But we believe, as Nicole said, that, yeah, it's going to be a tough sort of dip that we're going to have to come out of. But the long-term prospects for women's football in the States, we believe, are extremely positive.
That's great to hear, Mike. Tatjana, as with any crisis, the way an organization responds and bounces back essentially depends on its structure, right? And how it makes decisions. What approach does the Swiss Football Federation have, and where did women's football fall in?
I think every crisis is challenging. We had a home office as of early mid-March, and when it really hit us badly, like everybody else on different time frames, we got together immediately, and we had basically daily phone calls, Zoom meetings, and the first topics we had really to look at was what are the potential factors to impact us financially and with contracts with partners you're having. And then, of course, the management with those partners to be in contact with them, to explain to them where we are, what's possible, what's not possible. So actually, it was really busy at the beginning. We also had to look at the staff. We're about 100 employees at the Swiss FA. We have some employment rules which we had to look at to put people on reduced working hours a day, which we did on different percentages depending the jobs they're having. So it was really busy and a difficult time, and not a fun moment to work in. But I do think we handled it really well. We communicated quite openly and sent out emails, and were really approachable. We tried to reconnect with our staff, all of us, on at least weekly. So just things you can do in this moment. For women's football, I do think we're in a good position, and it's not because it's me, but I got elected to a director of women's football in March, and with this I got promoted to the management board. So from day one on, I was involved in all those meetings, and I do think even in that example it was good, because when we talk about the league maybe later on, I could make sure women's football, the women's national teams, and our league is represented in all the decisions which the FA took. And as we all know, because you're all experts, when we communicated to the media and to the fans and everybody else, we always made sure women's football was, the wording in our communication was clearly also highlighting women's football. And I think that was really valuable. And I do think it helped that I was sitting there and made sure it doesn't get forgotten.
Great. We'll definitely come back on that. Pedro, over to you. So you're in charge of women's football for LaLiga, but maybe just to explain to our viewers, the women national competition in Spain is actually run by the Spanish Federation, right? So can you explain us a bit more about how this dynamic exactly works and why is it like this in the first place?
Hi everyone. Thanks for the invitation, and hope everyone is doing well and safe at home. Well, as you said, 5 years ago, LaLiga started a project to really push women's football forward, to help our clubs. We had in those time, 2015, we had more than 20 clubs that were LaLiga clubs, so linked to men's football that had women's football. So LaLiga decided to start a project in order to push women's football forward, to add all the experience by running a professional men's competitions to women's football. And of course, it always has been the federation league, but we wanted just to put also a little bit of our experience in order to help, and mostly from the hand of the clubs, And during this time we've done a lot of initiatives together with the clubs in order to increase awareness. We've invested massively in content creation and in making all the information on women's football accessible to the people in Spain, in order to enhance the TV production, also putting some technology on the broadcasting, education also on our clubs. So we try to put all our efforts in order to make women's football a little bit more attractive, so to say.
Okay, great. Nicole, back to you. Now I know you spend your time in Tottenham, of course, but you've also dealt with many other football clubs across the UK and abroad, also with players. And I'm sure you've read the FIFPro report that came out last week on raising the game of the women's football, right? And according to that report, it says that most women's clubs don't even have the backroom staff to fulfill players' needs, right? So talking about physios, coaches, trainers, medical staff, etc. Coming out of this confinement and looking at the different protocols that are being talked about, do you think clubs, female teams, will be able to keep their female players fit and engaged without risking their health?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think that FIFPro report was fantastic. It was good weekend reading for me. So I urge everybody to read that. Resource is definitely an issue within the clubs that I certainly know and speak with on a regular basis. There is a variety of resource available, whether you're at the top of the WSL, towards the bottom of the championship, so the second tier in England. And I think I would be fearful that any kind of move to come back, even playing behind closed doors, it potentially puts players at risk. It would need to be absolutely 100% sure that every club in those leagues was completely confident that they could have the right facilities, the right people to ensure player safety. And of course, we've got to remember as well in the women's game, these players aren't necessarily just living on their own in their own house. They may be living with other players. They might be living with family. The opportunity for that kind of domino effect, if there was problems with infection, is a bit of a concern. So I think, as we would all say across everything, any industry, the moving to get it back into football and get us back playing has to be done with absolute 100% security that it is safe.
Yeah, Mike, there's been initial talks suggesting that the NWSL teams can go back to training in a matter of a couple of weeks. How are you handling that part of the situation with your team? And do you think that overall NWSL players are better prepared to keep themselves fit due to the fact that, if I'm not wrong, they have longer off seasons?
On the first question, Christian, we're obviously working with federal health authorities, and here in Oregon, working with our local and state authorities. And so no team, I think in any sport, Nicole alluded to this, is going to put any players or coaches or staff at risk. So we're going to be very careful, deliberate, thoughtful, and completely compliant as we begin to reintroduce training, players to training. We believe that as early as this week, we may begin here in Oregon to be able to have individual training. So with social distance measures and a lot of very new stringent protocol in place, to begin to have our players come back to our training facility and have individual training. If the proverbial curve keeps going down and everything goes well, that might get expanded to more group training in the coming weeks. Our players, like any professional player around the world, are unbelievably diligent. We have equipment. We've had equipment and sent to their homes, and we have online daily workouts and training sessions with them. So as fit as you can be without being on the field, I think our players are there. And obviously, unlike the rest of the world, players are still in their preseason, so haven't had the rigors of the full season on their bodies yet. So it'll be tantamount to another preseason, but I think once we get back to training, our players will hit stride pretty quickly.
All right. Let's hope for the best on that front. Tatjana, the international match calendar naturally also has been affected by this pandemic, and it seems that it's going to be pretty, in disarray for the next few years. Do you think this impact will be different for women's national team competitions compared to the men's?
Different, yeah, of course it's different because the schedules are different. The calendar per se is different with a different number of dates. Yeah, well, yes, I do think the impact is different. I'm not sure if it's worse or better. I think that's something to be seen. But what we do know is that in women's football, because the number of the full professional players, internationally speaking, is still rather low. As we know from the FIFPro report, and Nicole has mentioned it, the back staff is not everywhere on the same level. And the number of matches is really high. And now with this break, of course, if the countries continue to play, then that means a super short summer break. The ones who do not play have not played for months and have trained as marathon athletes and track and field athletes, not as football players. So we don't really know what that exactly will mean. We just know as soon as we can, everybody will go back on a pitch. You will have to play all these matches. And if you look at the number of matches in women's football, this is really something I think we should look at on an international level, because I think it's too high in many countries, not all, in some it's too low, to be fair, but on the best performing athletes, with the international matches a year, with the league and club matches a year, with the increased number of Champions League matches a year coming next season, and then putting that in perspective to semi-professional status or clubs with semi-professional amateur conditions, then I think you don't need to be a doctor to figure out why we have too high numbers of injuries in women's football. And of course, we also have to mention the strange competition format when you play, actually you play the final tournament of the Euros during the qualification phase of the Women's World Cup. So this is something, because we had to move the tournaments to other years. This I think we have to accept, because it's just a result of this crisis, but it will be a bit weird, I think, for the players to play those matches.
Yeah, thanks. And just have a quick follow-up question from one of our viewers, Bethany Hushan, essentially relating to the fact that the men's Euros have been postponed and the Olympics have been postponed, and therefore also the women's Euros have been postponed by a year. Do you think this is a good thing for women's players?
I think plenty of different opinions. To really have one answer, you need to know all the details and discuss it in depth. I know that Alexander Popp in Germany also raised the idea of playing the men's and the women's Euro together, which is also worth a thought, I think. I personally, my opinion was not to move it a year later until the Olympics got moved. And then when the Olympics got moved, it became obvious that you can't play two final tournaments in a year. Maybe there would have been an option if the 3 European teams at the Olympics considered the Olympics not as important and would prefer to play the Euros. So again, there's plenty of things you need to talk about. Given all the things we know now, maybe it was not a nice decision, but the best overall.
Yeah. And Pedro, what about in Spain? Because the Spanish FA, if I understand, is scheduled to take a decision by the end of this week at the latest regarding the current season of the women competitions. Contrary to the men's competitions, the overall sentiment is that the decision there will be actually to finish it right now and not, to stop it right now and not finish it. And instead, start preparing for the next season. I imagine this might upset some people, but what's the reality? What's the thought process behind the Spanish FA's probable decision of stopping the season, do you think?
Yeah, some weeks ago we had, first of all, in Spain we have we help to build. We have a big clubs association that has integrated more than 80 clubs that are playing in the first, second, and third division here in Spain. And in terms of the first division, we have 13 out of the 16 teams that compete in first division. So these teams are meeting regularly. And some weeks ago we had a meeting when the first intention of the federation was to close the season. We asked the federation that in our opinion it was too early, to take this decision, because I remember Nicole was saying being optimistic. Yeah, I'm also very optimistic, and if I can say so, one of the things that is good for women's football, if any, in this pandemic is that women's football, at least in Spain, has grown so much that it is not no more just a competition that you can just close and that's it. It's not just girls playing football in one team and okay, it's over and let's start next season. Our clubs, if the season would be finished as it is, we would lose only in TV rights nearly to 600,000 euros only per our contract, plus all the commercial, plus other incomes, that everything together, it's more than 1 million euros. So there's a big impact, a big economic impact on this, and this can impact the contracts of the players. This can impact the stability of the clubs. This can impact so many things that this kind of decisions should be taken considering the whole environment. So one of the things that we asked the federation was, first, it was too early. Second, we couldn't take, or it shouldn't be taking a decision together, or the same decision for all the non-professional competitions. In Spain, there are only 2 professional competitions in terms of football, in terms of soccer, that is first male and second male division football. The rest of the competition, women's football, third division men, fourth division men, everything is non-professional. So the federation was saying to take a decision, a common decision for all those competitions. And we asked the federation, hey, women's football is not just one more competition of this group, is something different, yeah? And all the players in Spain have a contract, there are TV rights, there are fans, there are stadiums, there is the league not to be decided. So in terms of integrity of the competition, once again, it's not just friends saying, okay, it's over and let's start in some months. So we are saying, please take the decision, if any, it should be taking, we still have time. It's only 8 match days to be played, to be finished. So this can be even made in 1 month if we want to do. FIFA also has said, okay, you can postpone the season. You can play until July, for example, the way that many men's leagues are playing. So the players are asking, hey, we want to play. The clubs are asking, we want to play. Of course, it will depend on the evolution of the pandemic. And what we are asking is, first of all, in men's football, we know the protocols. So we know the minimum requirements in order to say, we can reopen the competition in a safe environment. Let's see. We don't know still the protocols that should be applied to women's football. So we know the protocols for men's professional football, but nor the government, either the federation, has made any decision on that. So we believe that, okay, if the health protocols are too strong, because in here, I don't know, when we talked before, we have the big clubs linked to men's professional football that could really follow those requirements, but we also have smaller clubs that don't have these resources, or they are playing, for example, in facilities that are run by the local government or something like this, and they might have problems. And it might be a possibility, of course, to postpone the competition if the health requirements are too high. But first of all, we need to analyze this. We need to know them, and then let's take a common decision. And what we are asking from the clubs association to our federation is, let's talk and let's take this decision all together, and for the good of women's football. If there is no way to continue with the competition, of course, we will need to close the competition, because health is the most important thing. But please, let's consider women's football, at least in Spain, If it's from a legal point of view, if it's not a professional competition, from a reality point of view, it's becoming a professional competition.
Right. And also just to follow up on that, if the decision is to stop the season, the league would be expanded by next season, right? So the two clubs that are actually right now in relegation zone, they wouldn't actually relegate. Instead, there would be two new ones coming up.
Well, we don't have this information because many possibilities are in the press. You know, in the media, they're saying, okay, no one is going to second division, get down to second division, but maybe 2 are coming up or 4 are coming up. We've also heard some idea that I hope it's not implemented, that is 20 clubs and 2 groups of 10 in first division. I think this would kill women's football and would kill the evolution of the product and of the league. I don't think that this will be implemented, but let's see. I mean, what we are asking, and we really believe from the club perspective, clubs should be directly involved in any decision on the competition.
Yeah, very good. Nicole, back to you. Over the past few months and years, you know, everybody's been observing and proudly, I guess, talking about the fact that women's football has been gaining incredible momentum. But at the same time, you know, this begs the question, like, what's the data showing us, right? I mean, because you can see a lot and hear a lot, but what's the data really showing about the development of women's football as a whole, of how to grow fan bases, to grow commercially?
Yeah, really, really good point. And I think that was something that was also highlighted in the FIFPro report, in terms of that lack of data makes it quite difficult for us to look at that economic growth and the value of, you know, properties within the game. And that's something that I've experienced through working, you know, in women's football, but also actually in men's football, as you go sort of lower down the leagues, the lack of data and sophistication in terms of how clubs utilize different, you know, business intelligence tools, digital, you know, tools to be able to engage with fans, learn about their fan bases so that they can commercialize better. And we've seen some really positive, you know, steps in women's football, from viewership audiences of the World Cup, attendances of big games. You know, we've obviously had Atletico Madrid and Barcelona, 60 odd thousand, I think that was last season. Here in the WSL so far this season, we had Tottenham against Arsenal, which was 38,000. We had games at the Etihad, Stamford Bridge as well, and some really big attendances for those one-off big events that had sort of effective marketing and resource put around those one games. What I'm not then seeing is how that follows through into the next game when they, you know, go and play their home games at their normal home stadium. And I think a lot of that is down to the lack of data, but also the lack of resource and understanding at the club level. One of the points in the FIFPro report as well was around the ineffective marketing of, you know, the games, the domestic games. And I think it just shows that when we have those big events at the sort of parent stadium, the men's stadium, a lot of effective marketing goes into that, a lot of resource, but actually, how do we follow through with that? How are we capturing the information on those fans that we get? We've seen some really good examples in women's sport. In cricket, for example, the 2017 Women's World Cup final at Lords, they had 65% new attendees, so new ticket purchasers. They had never purchased a ticket for professional cricket before. And that data really showed them, you know, how much of them were females, how many of them were families, and it has allowed them to actually generate growth strategies to follow that sort of attendance and that interest through. And that's what I'm not yet seeing really in women's football.
Mike, what's your take on this? Because clearly, in the case of Portland, you have a very successful men's team and the most successful women's team. And I'm sure that there's a lot of European clubs and other clubs around the world that are probably envious of your success, right? Why do you think, from your perspective, has no other club managed to achieve the numbers of the Thorns? And what would you recommend to those people?
You know, I don't want to pretend to understand everybody's situation in their business, but I'd say this: if we all step back a decade and look at where women's football has come in the last decade, in many respects, we have together as an industry have taken enormous strides, and there's been in many parts of the world exponential growth in the support, the resources, the mind space for the women's game. And Pedro probably is too modest to tell you, but what LaLiga has done has been incredible. And the numbers and the growth is evidence of what I believe is the necessary ingredients. And then that one is have a commitment, whether you're a federation like Pedro or a club like us, to have a true commitment and belief in the future of the women's game. Secondly, as Nicole said, the adequate resources. And then thirdly, and it sounds so fundamentally obvious, is a plan to execute against those resources and that commitment. I think we've done a nice job of that in Portland. We believe from the top down that the women's game is as important as our men's club. And we have structured our business against those principles. So, for example, our head of commercial, who's a very highly compensated person who works for me, he and his team do both men's and women's game. There's nobody in our company that doesn't administer both on the business side, the women's and men's games together. So there's no separation. There's no, hey, you go down the hall and let us know how the women's game goes. It's everybody is charged, structured, and compensated, not unimportant, against both their goals for the men's team and the women's team. And we're not two teams, we're one club. And it sounds like such an obvious philosophy, but it's amazing how few clubs really, truly adopt that and act on it. And so, listen, we've done some things right. We have a good market, we have a good facility, we've had success on the field, we have 8 World Cup players. So we have a lot of things going for us. But I think really it comes down to, and LaLiga is a great example of that on a federation level. It's a true belief, a commitment to devote the necessary resources, even if the return on those resources isn't immediate. So, I mentioned at the top in my remarks, it's about investing and growing, and we may not see all of the fruits of our labor and our investment for a number of years, in some cases, maybe even a generation, but we believe that we will. And then having the right plan to execute against those goals and to deploy those resources as strategically as possible. And I think that's what we've done here in Portland pretty well. And we see it around women's football elsewhere in the world. But to your point, Christian, maybe not as widespread as it might.
Yeah, I guess it'll take a few years before they catch up. But eventually, if, as you said, if they keep the strategy, they put the right resources behind it, and they execute on that, then someday they'll come compete for your numbers. Tatjana, speaking of funding, both FIFA and UEFA have already announced that they will be supporting their member associations to cover this period of the COVID-19. If I'm not mistaken, both put together will be about 5 million per federation. How does the Swiss FA plan to allocate these funds, and how will you decide how much of it will go to the women's game?
Yeah, so obviously we pre-discussed those questions and I verified, because I wanted to make sure that I'm not saying something wrong. So what I can tell you today is it's actually not more funds from FIFA or UEFA. It's a decision to put those funds easier available. So they're both organizations, these funds are linked to clear guidelines, which is of course right. Timelines when it will be paid in terms of in relation to certain deliverables from the associations. So that has not changed. The amount is not higher for the moment. Maybe there will be something to come, which we of course all hope, because the pyramid starts from the top. The moment FIFA decides to give more funds available, UEFA will do as we as a National Football Association can do, and it will go down to every club or to players at the end of the day. So for the moment, no, but what has been done is that it's easier to get access to those funds. So the two, UEFA and FIFA have made sure that the money can be achieved or received earlier, and it doesn't need to be linked to certain development projects or other projects. It can be used to cover costs due to COVID. So for the moment, in certain cases, definitely good news, but no news so far on how much more it will be. And when it comes to women's football, this money anyway goes to women's football. The Swiss FA, the budget of women's football, generally speaking, is way higher than what the Swiss FA gets from FIFA and or UEFA together, or of course separate. So it will be way more. And the way we work is really not so much one by one, which I think is a good approach. I'm a total opponent of saying, you know, what comes in for women's football goes to women's football, what comes in men's football goes to men's football. I think that's a wrong approach. It's more like Mike said, it's a business, it's one company, and you have different assets. You have men's football, women's football, youth football, you may have futsal, you may have more social programs for older people, or name it. So I think every organization, club, or national association needs to figure out where do they want to put how much money to make that, you know, program or product grow. And so that's why, as I've always said since year, to me comes down to decision making. We need people in the decision making bodies who do believe in women's football, who see it as a one, and if they do, then more money gets allocated to women's football. That's actually, it sounds really easy, it's not, but that's where the problem lies. Women's football has not enough standard and status within the decision-making bodies of football worldwide speaking, with very few exceptions.
Pedro, on your side, you already mentioned briefly on the potential financial impact on the women's teams in Spain. So I see, yeah, you said it'll probably be up to $1 million, something like that. Will there be any kind of support for those women's teams? Because you said, like, obviously, some of them, they have strong male teams already, so they might, you know, cover this period without that many issues. But the ones that are, let's say, more dependent on the women's competitions, what kind of support do you think they will be able to receive?
Well, during this pandemic, the Spanish government established one mechanism that was able for all the companies in Spain, and also the clubs could get into it. That this was just like, how to say, to make it easy in English. So the government will pay part of the salaries, can be up to 70% of the salaries, and the rest would be paid by the club if they want to. So the players are not fired; they're just like they will get the same amount of money, but the government will take charge of some of this. So yeah, this was also a recommendation to our small clubs, mainly because this can be done without any big requirements, and this can save the season for them, because of course I think it's also the role of the government to help the companies, to help small companies, and to help clubs and everyone in their situation. So from this point of view, this is the help that the clubs could afford, but that's it. I mean, no more helps in terms of federation or any other spot government or something like this. And I'm not so sure also that we should get those help. I mean, the situation in Spain, there are many people suffering. So what we need to understand, that this is a crisis when we've been hit hard, and of course, government cannot help everyone. I mean, we are not more important than a restaurant or than a hotel or something like this. So we have a mechanism that has been used by everyone, and in my opinion, this can save partly the problem, or this can help to stabilize the situation for the next month. But of course, I think global football will change. We've been hit hard because it was bad luck, so to say, because mid-February we signed our first collective agreement, special in women's football, only for first division. So the clubs started to implement all the benefits and increase the salaries and everything. And just 1 month after that, the crisis came. And we signed the agreement because Media Pro, that is our broadcaster, made an extra effort and paid the clubs, increased the money that they were paying to the clubs, because he believed it was important to support this collective agreement with the players. So the club said, okay, we have this new agreement on the broadcasting side, we have more money, we can afford all these changes and all these increases, let's sign the agreement. And just after increasing all the salaries, 1 month after, the crisis comes. And of course, the TV cannot pay all the contract because no more matches are being broadcasted, and it's normal of that. So it's been really hard. It's been really hard. So let's see how it looks like. Of course, as Mike said, women's football has increased a lot and the level has increased. And 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, it was impossible to see someone paying fees for a transfer. Now we are starting to see this, and let's see in 10 years, everyone will pay for the players. Let's see how it affects. Yeah, let's see. I mean, the clubs are doing a strong support. We've asked the clubs, do you want us to talk to the players union and to say, okay, let's postpone the collective agreement for the future, whatever. They said, no. I mean, we've signed this. We want to sign this collective agreement. We want to go ahead. But of course, we will need to sit down and everyone take the right decisions in the future to make something stable.
Yeah. Nicole, question for you from the audience, and I'm going to give it to you because you're from the UK, and it comes from Kirsty Holland, who used to be general manager at Brighton, and she's asking whether you think there'll be an impact on UEFA Women's Euro in 22, given it will likely fall in the same time as the Commonwealth Games, because obviously, both competitions taking place in the UK, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe that those discussions were obviously happening with Birmingham and those running the Commonwealth Games. I think it was going to be inevitable that there was going to be some sort of, clash in the sporting calendar. It was never going to be perfect to have to shift these events. I think, Tatjana sort of alluded to it as well earlier, in that there was lots of discussions. Is it going to be best for the Euros to sort of stick where it was in 2021 and maybe have some sort of combined Euros with the men's? But then when the Olympics was changed as well, the problems there, because the Olympics is a really big tournament for women's football, a huge opportunity for us to generate those exposures that we desperately need and that visibility. So then actually shifting it to 2022 seemed to be really the kind of best option, but again, I think it's going to be very difficult to avoid the clash, and we always knew that the Commonwealths were going to be in 2022. I think the biggest thing, and this goes across the board with everything that we have to make decisions on now, it's about the collective thinking of all the stakeholders involved to make it the best situation possible. And actually, how can we market both events effectively? How can we ensure that it gets the visibility that's required? How can we ensure that the events, that the spectator and fan experience is the best at both events? And I think that's something that sport needs to show its strength here, in that coming through this, we've got to work together. We have to create these sort of commercially viable models of sport moving forward, and that is going to have an effect on the calendar of all these different events that we have for the next 4, 5, 6 years. So it's not ideal, but I think if we can all work together and ensure that collaborative work and creativity can ensure actually that we make the best out of it.
Great. Thanks. Mike, to come back to a point you made before about the situation with the NWSL, with having new deals in place since the beginning of this year, having new leadership, how does that all fit within your personal growth plan for Portland Thorns, and how much will depend on the success of the league as a whole and the other teams that are either already in it or will join in the near future? How much does your growth depend on how much they put into the women's game and how much commitment and belief they put in it?
Yeah, it's a good question. In the end, all of our leagues are associations, and we're partners. And in the NWSL and likewise in the MLS, we're partners, and we own this league together. And one of the hallmarks of American sports, particularly in American football, is soccer in our country. Is there's quite good balance and parity. Unlike some leagues around the world, it's not always the top 2 or 3 clubs that are always contending, and that the discrepancy of resources and spending and payroll and performance on the field between the top teams and the bottom teams isn't as great in our leagues in the States as you might see elsewhere around the world. And so yes, Christian, we need the Thorns can't exist without a healthy league, and there will always be more successful clubs than others in any league, and I like to think we'll be among those. But we need a healthy ecosystem, if you will, of women's football in our country, and you're seeing that there's been increased investment from other teams. The facilities have gotten a lot better. The spending on international players has increased, and the investment in academies and youth programs has increased. And as I mentioned earlier in the discussion, there are a number of teams around the MLS teams around the country who want to invest in the women's game. And so we will be surprised that in 2, 3, 4 years that we go from 9 to 12 to 14 and beyond in the number of teams. And so yes, we've got to take care of our business, but the league also has to be healthy, and that means healthy clubs, not just us.
Right. Tatjana, based on what Mike has been saying so far, what's your perception on what needs to happen on our side of the ocean? And there's actually a good question from one of our candidates, Benjamin Lines. He asked, in order the success of women's football to continue to grow, does football need institutional change or cultural change, in your opinion?
I think everything. There are so different areas worldwide. It's hard to give one specific answer. I do think society has changed already a lot. I think women's football has achieved such a higher status, awareness, respect, appreciation from the society that's not a topic anymore in our area. I'm not speaking now about maybe South America or Africa, but Europe and North America, definitely. Institutionally, I do think that there's a lot to do. I've spent the last over 20 years in international sports organization and now in a national association. And even though there's so many good things and great projects and good stuff, it just doesn't really come down from the top down. It's too many lip services. It's not really serious. It's maybe meant serious, but it doesn't really reflect when it comes down to clubs and leagues and sponsorship deals and players treatments. And it's just still too much of, yeah, that's nice, we want to do it, but then the gap is too big between the men's professional football and women's professional football. So the pressure right now comes from the society, the public, the media, and some partners, luckily, that helped a lot. Of course, the FIFA Women's World Cup last summer was amazing and helped again a lot. But that's why I see, as we have said, I see this as a chance, this crisis for us, because it's really hard to change football structure on a sports political level. And to me, a crisis is the best moment to try to change it, because you really almost not possible to do it if there's no crisis, basically. And this might help to have a more equality orientated inclusion, diversity, women, men together, more a social approach to football. And as a federation, I think that's our duty. We do have the professional game, but we also have the amateur game, and we should be a reflection of the society in our country, and we should make sure football can be played by all kids in our country in a safe environment. And that thought that it's for all needs to be something which is our mantra, and that's something we can try to get in our decision-making heads now in this crisis, because that's what might help.
Yeah, so really focusing even more on grassroots, on like the non-elite, let's say, levels of football, yeah?
Yeah, and I think that would be too long now to discuss, but we have a high number of dropouts in the youth area. We have young kids who do not want to go to 3 training sessions a week at 6 o'clock and have a coach yelling at them. There's a change in society, and we need to adapt. And football should be the pro elite game, of course, and then there should be the fun and amateur game, which is played by 95% of the people in your country. And this needs to be a bit more looked at, I think, so that we don't have that risk that football loses the huge success factors we have towards society and people. I do think there's a bit of a risk right now between the elite level of the game and the people's opinions about football, and we need to make sure this gets back in line.
Yeah, absolutely. Pedro, in Spain, women's football has seen a period of professionalization, as you also mentioned in the previous years. At what stage of that process had you arrived before the crisis started, and what are the next phases going to look like? And there's actually a question from the audience from Cristobal Aranguiz. What are the main objectives in women's football in the short and long term?
Well, Mike, thanks for the kind words that you said before. Yeah, I think in link to the pandemic and to this situation now, I think women's football needs strategy. I mean, needs to really focus on taking the right steps. Yeah. And for this, everyone should be involved in this. Yeah. What we did in the league was just to lead this change, to tell the clubs, okay, let's take the right steps. So, and in Spain, what we decided to say is, first of all, analyze the situation. In Spain is a football country, of course. We're known for having one of the best clubs. We're known for having great players. The fans are crazy. But in terms of women's football, no one knew women's football. I mean, it was just the mentality 10 years ago, 8 years ago was, okay, yeah, there's something called women's football. There are girls playing football, but that's it. And we had big brands. We had Barcelona, we had Valencia, we had Atletico Madrid, that were big clubs investing in women's football, but the environment was not the right one. So, and this was one of the reasons for LaLiga to jump in women's football, because those clubs were asking LaLiga, hey, we are investing so much money in these projects, and it's nothing out because the environment is not right. There was no commercial strategy, there was no awareness, there was no one knew from it. So we had to build some important stages. So, and one of the key points, and I totally agree, and I still remember 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I started to study all these things, I remember to analyze the situation in Portland, and Portland has been the role model for me, at least, yeah, on how to really believe on this. And one of the things that I'm trying to show my clubs, or to show the clubs, is the importance of understanding that the clubs have two first teams. And this is something that is really in the DNA of, for example, Portland Thorns. I still remember this documentary on CONCACAF on YouTube that and as Mike told, everyone is not thinking on, okay, let's help the men's team, and we also have a women's team. No, we have two first team, and women's football has turned into such a valuable asset for the club. So that it's so stupid not to really see the power of women's football for your organization. So I think we need to really work and focus on one objective, is create a product. We need to, if we want to succeed, we want to grow, we need fans, we need the investment, we need the brands to jump in. And for this, you need to understand that you need to offer them something. So let's start building something that is nice to watch, nice to experience, nice to invest. In Spain, this season has been the first time ever in history that we sold our TV rights. And this is not because we are girls and we need to help them, it's because the broadcasters believe it's worth to invest in it. Last year, we were building this product. We were investing on the match day, on how it looks like on TV, on where the photographers are placed, on creating contents, on opening the big stadiums for selected matches, so that are surrounded by a good marketing strategy. So, and I think this belief on really creating something valuable, something big, a product, working on this should be the whole strategy. And for this, I think after this pandemic, this strategy is key, because if not, we will step back on 5 or 10 years ago. It's just not, oh, okay, let's how to rebuild the league for the next year. No, it's okay, how to really focus on developing something really professional, something really strategically, something, a good, valuable project on that. And for this, again, my friend Mike is the one, the example on how to understand this. There's two first teams mentality is key for the future of women's football.
Yeah, thank you, Pedro. Nicole, in this confinement, obviously, we as a society, as human beings, we miss a number of things, including family, community, accessibility. How do you think women's football can turn this into an opportunity once we're out of the situation?
Yeah, I think women's football has some really clear values. We've talked about the equality, inclusion, those sorts of things that women's football represents, and it's an opportunity to really shape society for a better future. But I think also, we've seen lots of attendance information around, families coming to more women's sport, women's football particularly. It's more accessible in terms of players, things like that. I think that presents a huge opportunity for commercial partners, because when we do get out of this, brands, companies are going to want to invest in sports or vehicles that can emotionally connect with consumers, and sports always going to be a perfect vehicle for that. Women's football offers something very unique because of those values and behaviors that it instills in society. So again, we've talked a lot, all of us, about the opportunity here. And I think, if I was at a club or at a rights holder looking ahead at the calendar, we've got the Olympics next year, the Euros, the World Cup. What an opportunity to build that strategy that Pedro's talking about, and look at that long term and that growth. And within that, the commercial opportunities, not just for broadcasters, but for brands to actually get involved and support this change that we all want to see as we come through this pandemic. I think women's football really does offer that new look football that quite a few of the leaders in the game have been talking about. So for me, what a huge opportunity. And Pedro's mentioned it as well, in that I can't get my head around why people wouldn't see women's football being a key part of your strategy, and that process of looking at your two first teams is absolutely critical. For me, I have seen in the past too many examples of where women's football is sort of grouped with the men's under 23s and sort of below. And actually it's that culture, it's that vision, it's that leadership to put it in the pedestal that it should be.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Now I would like to finish off with one question for everyone, just to wrap the session off. Obviously, yeah, a lot of these things will have been mentioned to some extent over the past hour or so. But for anyone out there working like yourselves in women's football, what would be your one top recommendation for them to do right now? If, for example, in the previous months and years, they've been hitting roadblocks and not being able to advance these kind of like mindsets or strategies internally, what would be your number one recommendation that they can do now to make sure that over the next few weeks and months, they can finally, let's hope, achieve some of that change internally in their organizations? Tatjana?
Okay, I take the first one. It's unfortunately not an easy one, but I do think we need to have a fully embedded football structure. Like we all said, football is one, so it's top men's club, top women's club. It has to be one, because we can just take so many synergies from each other, learn from each other and enrich each other's. But at the same time, in some areas, sometimes commercial, sometimes sporting, sometimes whatever, PR, there has to be a women's football dedicated approach. The Women's Data Gender Gap book has shown clearly that everything in the past has been focused on men and how men deal with it and what men do. And I think we need to open up that window and look at female specific stuff, medical issues, all of these things. So it has to be both together, football for one and women's football specific. And if we can start think like that in the future, yeah, then I can, then I'm in my dreams and I can stop work in football.
All right, great. Mike, what about you? Anything else that you haven't mentioned? Maybe something that you yourself recognize that you could actually do even more for developing women's from your side?
Yeah, one topic we haven't really talked about, I think Tatjana and Nicole said it really beautifully, but one topic we haven't quite talked about, which I think is really critical, and that is, what the magic behind what we do as clubs and leagues and federations is this connection that we have with our community and with our fans. And that connection now in this crisis we're in is more important than ever. And coming out of this crisis, being in lockstep with your community and what your community needs, and being really truly part of the broader fabric of your community in a genuine way is going to lift our game even higher, I think. And so as a club, we're not just thinking about our business today and what we got to do. It's like, how do we fit into what everything else that's going on in our community, in our state, in our country, and how can we play a positive role in that? And how can we be a positive influence on people's lives just beyond sport? Because we do have unique platforms to do that in a way that other businesses don't. And if we can, be a positive influence in the lives of our fans and create new fans through that, then we're going to come out of this as a club much more quickly. And so we're thinking a lot about that. And then the last thing I'd say is, I believe, and Nicole alluded to this, sport will be part of the healing process around the world. It always has been. After world wars, after Great Depression, sport has always been a place for healing, for people to come together and celebrate and be with each other. It may look different, but what also may be different is how people consume our game. People are now, grandparents are now using Zoom and they never heard of Zoom, and people are doing things online, doing things differently than they did 2 months ago. And how will that, or can that impact how they consume women's football? And is women's football in a position to be more nimble and do things differently than perhaps more mature, more developed sports? I think yes. And so we're looking at, do we present our game differently? Do we broadcast our game differently? How do our fans and players interact differently coming out of this? And so I think an underlying theme of the whole discussion today is, as challenging as this is for the sport, for women's football around the world, it creates some new opportunities and new ways to interact with our fans, energize our fans, and create new fans.
Thank you, Mike. Pedro?
The coffee's kicking in, I'm sorry.
Good to hear. Pedro, any last recommendation from your side?
Yeah, when if you need to convince anyone to jump on women's football, I would say the first answer should be, why not? Is there any reason to not jump in? Really? There's no reason. There might be one reason, or one answer should be, it's not economically viable yet, I would say. Yet, because we have many examples, and in here we have one big example that says it can be profitable. Of course it can be. It's just about, I don't know any business that is profitable from day one. It depends on how you invest, what is your approach, and how you treat the product. So I would say, if you're a smart executive and you take a look on what's happening around you take a look on what's happening on the States, on MLS franchises investing more and more on women's football. If you take a look on Europe, where all the big clubs are investing in women's football, your question should be, oh, something is happening around. I mean, maybe I should be there, and maybe I should be there soon, because maybe in 10 years or in 5 years jumping in, it's too late and you're late. And one of the things that Mike said, we as clubs or as organizations, we are fun oriented. I mean, everything what we do is sell entertainment to our fans, to our customers. So why forget one essential part of our customers, that are women? That is half of the population. And of course, they are also following men's football. But I think the message of this equal treat, or of this DNA of my club, that is, for me, men and women are the same, and I treat them. It's not about how much they earn, or it's not about salary. It's about how you treat the product and how you invest in the product, and the respect you give to the product. At this point, at least, yeah. It's not all about the money. It's about, if you really believe on this and you treat it with care, this is the message that you're giving to the mothers, to the daughters, and those mothers are also the customers of your entertainment. And so Why not taking advantage of such a valuable asset that is women's football? I should be just don't be late. The thing should be don't be late.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Nicole, to wrap up, your final thoughts, your one biggest recommendation you would leave with other peers working in the sphere?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to certainly agree with what the guys have said as well. One thing that I'd read recently was that if the consumer economy had a sex, it would be female, purely because of the influence that females have over purchasing decisions. So that is an absolute clear, question. Why wouldn't you want to get involved in women's football? Why wouldn't you want to invest? So that's definitely something to really bear in mind. I think one thing that maybe we haven't mentioned is really looking into the future, looking at things that will affect, our world and therefore sport and football, but is climate change. We've seen it even before this pandemic hit. We've had quite a few issues globally with climate change that has affected sport. And if we look, forward, that may well and is very likely to have an impact. So we need to be ready. Clubs need to be ready to ensure that they are sustainable, even beyond just being able to have live football being played. We need to think about how we engage the fan bases, how we bring in new fans, how we keep the fans that we currently have, and ensure that we are future proof. And I think what we desperately need in order to be future proof is leadership, diverse leaders to match our diverse society and the change in consumer habits, the shift in those consumer behaviors, because without that, we are going to lag behind. So I think those are the real important points. And if you're a student or a player even looking to get involved in the football industry, be passionate and be determined that you are going to do that, because we need those views of people and experienced players within the industry, and we need that diverse leadership to push through those cultures, push through everything we've been saying through today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. And yeah, with this, it's time to wrap up the 7th episode of the FBA series. Thank you so much for everyone that tuned in. Thank you, of course, to our special guests, Nicole Allison, Pedro Malabia, Tatjana, Haenni, and Mike Golub. Thank you so much for your insights. Thank you so much for sharing your optimism on women's football with the rest of the world. For anyone that joined in later or wants to share this webinar at some point with friends, colleagues, family, it will be available on our YouTube channel, so make sure to check in. And feel free to also follow our social media channels, where on Thursday afternoon at 5 p.m. CEST, we will announce the next topic and the next speakers. So having said that, thank you again for watching, and stay safe.
Stay safe.
Thanks, guys.